Thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really glad to be here. So, thank you everyone for coming and joining me as we are going to talk about omens today from an ancient Greek perspective, but also how this can be useful for now. So, just a couple of things. I'm trying to get this to load. Well, I did this beforehand and that is now not working so well. So what I am going to do is do it a little differently. There we go. Oops. Okay, so can you all see that? I think so. So I wanted to say that, if there are questions that you have as I am going through this, I'm going to try to leave some time at the end, but I'm not easily thrown. And if it is something where you have a clarification question, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up and ask your questions. So what we're going to be doing today is talking about listening to the Theoi in ancient Greek tradition and specifically related to omens. So, my understanding of religion generally is that I understand religion as relationship, and in particular, being in active, very positive relationships with the Theoi, which is the ancient Greek name for the gods, and also with other spirits, and religion as relationship also with the spiritual aspects of our own nature. And I believe that the basic medium of all relationships is communication. And communication, of course, has two main parts. There's the part in which we're essentially speaking. And in a religious context, this is things like obviously prayer, but also any form of rituals in which we have invited the gods or spirits to be with us, making offerings. And I would say that that includes various acts that we may do specifically with an intention to honor the great ones. One of the things that is specific in polytheism, and this is very, very clear in ancient Greek religion, is that when we are speaking, when we are doing one of these acts, that we are intending to communicate to the great ones, to do something in honor of them, you must specify to whom you are speaking. Otherwise, it is not clearly known. So when I do something, for instance, one of the forms of regular thing that I do as an offering, honestly, to the god Poseidon, is I pick up plastic trash and I go and I throw it away and I say, "My Lord Poseidon, I do this in honor of you. May this please you." And that indicates and it sends kind of a flag up that here is this action that I am taking that is in alignment with his agenda, and I am doing it specifically as a way of speaking to him, of honoring him. So whenever we're doing any kind of offering, anything in service, and we want one of the great ones or spirits to know that it is for them, we need to say that. So in ancient Greek religion, prayer is the essential part of every religious act. And even if that prayer is just name the spirit, I honor you. So that's one part, is we spend a lot of time speaking to the great ones. But the other part of communication is listening. And there are a number of different ways in which we listen that are traditional in a ancient Greek setting. There's the omens, which is what we're going to focus on today. There are divinely inspired dreams. There are oracles. And then there is the phenomena of theophany or epiphany, which is when one of the great ones becomes immediately tangible in the physical world to us. So what are omens? This is an important form. It is probably the most common and important forms of listening that was part of daily practice for the ancient Greeks. Omens are signs that are sent to us by the Theoi, by the gods that are attempting to communicate with us. And there are two major types. The first one is what we could call natural omens. These are things that as we're going through life, one of the great ones is trying to communicate with us, and so they send us a sign. But there are also then provoked omens, situations in which we, through various means, can say, send me a sign. I'm trying to hear you. Send me a sign now. Because some of the challenges with omens is that they are very, very easily overlooked. The gods are honestly, I believe, communicating to us way more than we appreciate, understand, or perceive. That we're going through life and there's all of this potential communication coming through, and honestly, most of us are missing it most of the time. The other thing is that an omen can be very easily misinterpreted. It is a sign that is given to us, and we need to be able to take that sign and figure out what it means. So, in the way in which I think about these various forms of communication, and I gave you that list, I consider omens to be the most common. They take the least energy, and they are the most easily understood, all the way up to, because they're symbolic, right? All the way up to a theophany in which one of the great one appears and talks to you, and that takes the most energy, is the most rare, but is not as easily misunderstood. Oracles are further on that side of things. Oracles, there's when one of the great ones that is usually associated with a particular cult is speaking directly, and the most common for that is the god Apollon, who is my primary devotional god. Okay, so that's what omens essentially are. When we talk about omens, when we're talking about signs, we don't mean this in kind of like the postmodern understanding of symbols and signs as language games, that all of these things have kind of no inherent meaning, and that their meaning is constructed and negotiated across time. That's actually not what we're talking about here. In ancient Greek poetic culture, the sema is the word for it, which is the word for sign, which is, of course, where you get semiology. A sema is a gift. It is a gift that one of the gods of Theoi is giving to humans. And the way in which it works is that they are puncturing, they're like puncturing through the veil that separates us from spiritual reality, where the gods kind of have their natural existence. And so there are all of these semas, these signs that are given to us regularly. And the trick here is that you have to be able to recognize that something is assigned this way. So first you have to say, wait a second, here is this thing, the sema that is being dropped down from the gods, puncturing the veil and giving me this opportunity to kind of grab it and connect. And then also to correctly understand it. And in order to do that in the ancient Greek system, you have to have two different things. You have to be emotionally qualified, so you have to be open in the appropriate way, and then you have to be morally qualified, that there is a moral character aspect. But if you can connect to the sema, to the sign that is given to us as this gift of grace, which is where you get the word charite, charis, it's a gift, or charisma. That's where that word comes from too. It's a gift that's given, and if we can correctly connect to it and grab a hold of it, then you can connect to this very higher reality and to the being who then gifted the sign. And so in ancient Greek culture is song culture. And so they think through and experience reality through this kind of poetic way of thinking and being. And certainly they're not the only ones that are song culture. This is fairly common in many of the pre-Christian traditions. So the sign, the world of the song, is in a fundamental way more real than our normal day-to-day living. And so this is what allows you to grab those symbols and move up into that area that is more real. So if what we want to do, and I would encourage us to build this as part of our practice, and I don't think this is specific to ancient Greek religion, in that I think you could be a devotee of any of the gods and try to cultivate this sense of omen seeking and being aware. The first thing is to cultivating this sense of wonder. You have to be able to be open and to be ready to receive. And you don't get a gift if you are not open to being able to receive that gift. And I think in many ways, this requires us to counter so much of our socialization and programming that we get, that constantly tells us that we are not worthy, or that we are too small and the gods are too important. I'll just share as a experience that I had. There was this time in which I was working with Apollon, and I was asking for something, and I said, oh, I'm really sorry to bother you with this. And he said, I'm not that small. I'm like, what do you mean you're not that small? It's like, I am not that small. That is your limitation, not my limitation. I have the ability to do all of the big cosmic things and attend to you. This is not my limitation. I was like, oh, okay. So I just wanted to share that. And that I think this is something that even those of us who have been working on trying to unmake our socialization, we still can have these ideas that get in the way. So we have to be open and ready to receive the gifts that are given. And then we need to pay attention. And in particular, we should be paying attention anytime when we are engaged in one of those kind of acts of speaking, especially in ritual or in praying. Be aware of anything that is going on in this kind of open and ready to receive fashion. And then when you encounter an omen, pay attention to how it feels in your body when you're encountering one of these sima, one of these signs that's being dropped through and is puncturing the veil between the reality of the Theoi and where we are right now in this moment. Pay attention to how that feels, because once you've been able to correctly identify enough of these, then your body will give you those signs and you'll be able to say, wait a second, that's not just a bird, something's happening. And then you'll be able to flip in and pay more attention. So I really do believe that the wisdom of the body is something that most of us are not as aware of. And once you can see what it feels like, that will make it easier for you to identify. So there are a number of very common types of omens, but there's a couple that I'm going to mention here. So there are a lot of bird omens. There are traditional associations with birds, such as Zeus is associated with eagles, falcons with Hera, crows and swans with Apollo and Apollo, owls with Athena, doves with Aphrodite. There's, this sort of thing. But I'm going to say, in my experience, any of the great ones can use any of the birds, has been my experience. And what I'm looking for when this is happening is I'm looking for, first of all, the feeling of it and something that is unusual that is catching my attention in a particular way. In particular, I tend to have really big eagle omens. I mean, any of the big birds of prey that you don't see very often, in my experience, those are some of the ones that are used most often. But you're looking for some form of bird, and there's rules around it that are traditional, but I actually think those are less important than knowing when something is happening and then paying attention to what's going on around you. So I'll give you an example of a couple of things. First of all, I do tend to have a lot of eagle omens when really big things are happening, but I don't think that that is always Zeus that is using them. But when my attention is suddenly drawn and there is an eagle in a place that is not normally an eagle, and especially if I'm asking questions, I pay a lot of attention to that. And a lot of times it's affirming something that I am doing. Another one, though, just to pay attention to, like, when your attention is suddenly drawn to one of the birds. There were many years ago, I live in Washington, D.C. We have the Beltway. It is like literally has been rated as the worst traffic in the country. And there was a time in which I was driving, and of course, it's like lots and lots of cars on every side. And a crow flew in this very strange pattern and kind of came up over my windshield in this way in which I could almost hear a voice saying, "Watch out." And I quickly, because that happened, just like shifted into hypervigilant awareness. And the car in front of me had its tire blow out. And if I had not been paying attention, I would have hit it. And so that kind of moment in which you have something that draws your attention strongly, if you see a bird doing a very unusual pattern someplace very closely directly to you, that is something I would pay attention to. Another form of omen that is very important in ancient Greece is Kladon. And I think this is one of the ones that we get most often, and it's easy for the gods to use it. This is overheard pieces of speech that have meaning. They're unusual and they have meaning in the moment in which you were thinking about something or doing something. And in particular, I would say pay attention to misspeaking in rituals. But also, I have found, and I think a lot of you have probably had this experience, that when you're really dwelling on something and then a song comes on and the song makes exact sense for what you need. Another one is to be paying attention to when your attention is drawn, because part of what's being manipulated here is your attention as they're dropping these signs in, to symbols and logos that make sense. I will say for myself, one of the things that is deeply comforting, because the great ones have tremendous compassion for us, thankfully, when I get in these moods of like, oh, maybe I'm not doing as good a job as I should be or whatever, almost inevitably within like 10 minutes someone will walk by with something that either says Apollo, Apollon, or clearly has one of his very clear symbols on it. And so that is just another thing to be paying attention to. But I do think the random hearing of words is important. And like I said, the old name for this is Claydon. And in fact, they used to have a temple in which what you would do is you would go into the temple and you would pray on your question. You'd stop up your ears, you'd walk out into the street, and then you'd take the cotton out. And the first thing you heard was your omen. And that's a way of provoking Claydon. So, omens and rituals. Again, I encourage us to be aware of what is happening and anything that's unusual that is pulling your attention. So, pay attention to how any ritual fire that you are using is burning. That's a very important one. Attention within the ritual to suddenly being drawn a particular way. Like if you were in a ritual and all of a sudden you are drawn to a particular bird sound or whatever it is. And anything unanticipated that feels meaningful could well be an act of communication coming from the gods. So, again, in addition to natural omens, you can also provoke omens, because one of the challenges is that we are wandering around in a very busy world without a whole lot of bandwidth to be paying attention to things sometimes. So, creating circumstances in which you're saying, I am now looking for communication. So I just mentioned that old way of provoking Claydon, which was an old cult, but we could do things like that anyway. You could say, please communicate with me. I am now open and listening, and then see what random stuff is happening. I used to do that a lot walking around my neighborhood, where I would just be like, I am now going into a somewhat meditative state as much as I can in an urban area. And I'm going for a walk, and I would be paying attention to what would be coming up as far as overheard language, songs, and just seeing if my attention was drawn to something. Claromancy is the old term for drawing lots. And this is another way of getting information. This is really often yes, no questioning. But the key to this is that you must pray first to a particular one of the Theoi for it to be them that is guiding you. This honestly can work with any form of divination. But in order to use it as omens, as opposed to it is speaking to your higher self, it is, giving you something through symbology that you were doing with your own spiritual nature, you have to pray and say, whoever the being is, please guide this reading so that I am getting communication from you. It's like to do an invocation and invite them to use the system, whatever it is. So yes or no kinds of things that you do in a series of questions is better for clarity than something that I also love for many purposes, like the tarot, which has so many different potential meanings. So sometimes you want the more kind of variation and richness of something like a tarot reading, but a lot of times if what you're trying to do is communicate to one of the Theoi, you might want to go in for a series of yes-no questions. So interpretation, because like I said, one of the dangers of omens, one of the biggest ones, is that we just miss it entirely. But the second one is that it is more easily misinterpreted. So there are old rules. But in the end, ultimately, omen interpretation is an art. So if you go back and you read ancient texts, they'll say, oh, if a bird is flying on this side and it's this kind of a bird, it's that god and it means this. But if they're flying this direction, and again, I have experienced more that the rules are not as helpful. I don't think they're necessary. I think it's more of an art. And so you have someone like Aristander, who was Alexander the Great's seer. And no small part of his Alexander the Great's success is that he had this amazing, amazing seer who worked with him and who was well known for not following any of the rules in his interpretation of omens, but being dead on accurate. And so I think for me, the way in which I tend to approach this is I tend to look and test, especially the feeling tone of particular omens. Every now and then I'll get something as clear as that kind of like look out kind of moment that I mentioned earlier, or it'll be you're on the right path or something along those lines. I'm looking for the feeling tone. And then the interpretation gets stronger as your relationship deepens. And again, if you want to be building some of that, using one of those yes, no forms of divination, I often use a pendulum. Sometimes I'll draw lots, but asking for one of the great ones to guide that can also help you get a stronger sense and build that confidence, as well as building the experience of what it feels like in your body when one of the great ones is talking to you and you are listening. So I have a suggestion that should you want to try to get better at paying attention and listening and interpreting omens, that you give yourself a minimum of a month and have a structured way of doing it. So I would recommend for this that you work with one deity, because otherwise it can get more confusing. And what you're trying to do right now is learn, especially in your body, how does it feel when I'm being communicated with? What does it feel like when I'm encountering one of these gifts, the sema, the gift that's coming from one of the great ones? And if you're working with one, especially if it's one that you have more of a devotional relationship with, I think that will help you develop that sense, as opposed to also then trying to understand what of this is the energy feeling of a particular god that might be different than another one. So I would start with one, and then you can move on after that. So in order to do this, you would need a pendulum, a notebook or an app that you can record on with you every day, an image of whatever deity it is that you want to work with. And like I said, I suspect this would work in some of the non-Hellenic as well. And then I would recommend a candle. So the first thing to do is train your pendulum so it knows, show me yes, show me no, and get to the point where it's very, very clearly indicating which one is yes and which one is no. And that varies according to individuals. So for me, it's like mine always moves in circles. So there's the clockwise circle and there's counterclockwise circle, whereas other people, it's up and down, side to side. So the first thing is just train your pendulum so that you know how it is indicating yes and no to you. And then every morning for this period of time, which you're going to do your omen training, light the candle in front of your image and pray. And what you're going to ask for is, sometime during this day, please send me a sign that I will recognize, help me recognize it, and remember and understand it. And then you go through your day and you pay attention and you record, and you pay special attention whenever you think to your body, whenever you think that you are perceiving an omen. And then at the end of the day, light the candle again, pray to the same deity, and ask them to guide the hand, and in both to guide the hand of the pendulum, because you're asking them to use that as a provoked omen, and test each omen. Ask if it was an omen. Test any interpretations that you're making, and do this in yes, no questioning. And what will happen is at the end of the month, you will have a pretty good sense of how it feels. You'll have a stronger relationship with one of the Theoi. You'll have a better sense of what it's like in your body when you receive an omen. And you will also have begun kind of habituating yourself to pay attention and to be open to receiving sacred gifts. And you also will have developed a method, which is what I use, the pendulum method, for checking your intuition. And so this is my book that will be coming out on December 8th. I'm really excited about it. So I tried to put everything in a single volume of everything that anyone would need to know in order to have a good, stable practice. And it has a lot of exercises in it. And I am really excited to be able to share. So are there any questions? Got a few minutes. I need to get over here. Oh, thank you, Jamie. So I don't know, can they just unmute and ask questions? Feel free. The coolest message I've gotten using like omens, you mean? So the book is out December 8th. So we've got quite a few here. Okay. So, I mean, I think the one that kept me from getting killed in a car accident was pretty good. But I also have had one. Oh, it's chat only. Okay. I've also had another really important one. When I received my call to do particular work when I was in Greece, and I received a particular calling from both Athena and Apollon Apollo. One of the things that happened is, of course, I was like, am I delusional? Is this really happening? And I got a couple of incredibly blatant, powerful eagle omens as I was asking these questions. And they were so dramatic and so specific. And like I said, it was while I was asking. One of them was, and they're never up there, I saw an eagle, not just on the Acropolis, when I was sitting there saying, is this what I need? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I delusional? It landed on the roof of the Temple of Athena Polius, who had just called me. And so I was like, all right, the answer is yes. So that's one that was really cool. Now let's see here. Yes, Morpheus, the god of dreams, Hypnos, god of sleep. So there's a whole section in the book on dream incubation. I'm seeing quite a bit here. So there's a lot on dream incubation. And there's of course divine dreams that just come to you, and then there's also, like I said, methods of creating that. My husband hit two birds separately with this vehicle. I heard it's an omen, and also heard it's a spiritual opening. Is any of that true? So again, I think one of the key things there is, what is the feeling tone on that? When he hit the two birds, did it feel like something was communicating to him? Did it feel like an opening? I would be checking some of that kind of thing. And I would do some pendulum, like training the pendulum and asking as well. It can vary. So just like as an example, if someone has a symbol that comes through of a snake, that means something really different if you have a snake phobia versus someone who sees a snake as a symbol of immortality. So that's why, to me, I tend to work with what is it that's the feeling tone behind that. Sorry, I'm trying to get back. There's a whole lot of questions here. It's taught there's omens and portents, with the former being. Those are both like English language translations. I think an omen can be either, in the way in which I think of it. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of different comments. I'm trying to find one that's like an actual question. Yeah, so I'm seeing some here about like people observing unusual kind of behavior amongst crows and ravens. And I think the big thing is, if you are drawn to it, what's the feeling tone? What does it feel like? How does it look? And are you doing something specific? I saw a history show that said that in order to follow this path, you should also follow the old ways, such as sacrifices and such. Is this true? And if so, do you go into killing animals and sacrificing your own blood? Also, is there a chance to anger one of the Theoi or another? I have an entire section in there in that I do not believe, and this is me, I am not speaking for like Greek reconstructionists, because I am not one, but I do believe in the ancient Hellenic Theoi, and I have had a long-standing relationship with many of them, and I believe that goes back into past life things. I don't think that we need to be sacrificing animals. I don't think that it's appropriate in our particular culture, and that it has a very different meaning. And it's not like, if you were an ancient Greek, that would be the only time you would eat meat, and it would be a communal activity. And so I don't think you need to do that. Hera against Aphrodite, Buddha against Jupiter. I have not encountered that so much in terms of like angering one Theoi or another. You want to be in appropriate relationship. So, you want to be able to build appropriate relationships. And again, I've got a lot in there about that. Okay, I have more. Sorry, there's a lot here. I'm like looking for a question. So dream incubation. Oh, isn't there a chance to anger one Theoi or another? I mean, if you do something that is truly offensive, and I have a whole section in which I'm talking about something that is, there's hamartia, which is the unintended mistake that creates miasma. And then there is hubris, which is more of a flaw of character. But I don't think it's so much about, how do I put this? I don't think it's so much like, oh, Athena's going to be jealous if I do more with Apollon. I don't think it's that kind of a thing. So I don't know if there's a more specific question or not on that. Repeating my question, omens are very personal, but can, say, for example, a family have repeated omens that carry the same meaning for them? There are sometimes family situations that I have encountered that seem to be ancestral. And I actually have a coven sister who, her family, and it comes out of her background culturally, has sets of things that have meant something for her family for a long time. So Philip, asking about following the old ways like the Festival of Lupercalia. Again, I am not a reconstructionist. I think I am interested in rebirthing for current situations. So that is my practice. Okay. Do the Theoi punish, become angry, and smite people? That's not something I worry about much, to be honest. I think they have more to do than that. I don't, the kind of thing that the view of the gods, and this is my personal thing, but the view of the gods that has them basically being like less evolved than some of the humans I know, I think that is human projection. One more question. Okay, thank you. Anything else for one last question? And I think we are, oh, thank you, Eva. I think we are at time. Okay. Um, any last thoughts? So you are quite welcome. I mean, I would be happy to talk more with people. If they like, but I think the biggest one for the omens is, I would say, regardless of what pantheon you're interested in or have connections to, I think trying to be open, pay attention, and create some structured training for yourself, because I think the biggest thing there is that we are not open, or not that we're not open, that we don't recognize when the gods are trying to talk to us. I think they are trying to talk to us. I believe they are very compassionate. At least the ones that are worthy of worship are, certainly. And by worship, I actually mean building relationship. Like I said, I don't think of, I think they're looking for us to be fully evolved humans, and real adults. So I think any of the training that helps you become more aware of all of the many, many, many gifts that we are being given that we just miss, and the ability to strengthen those relationships. So I guess that's what I would say. Great. Thank you all so much. I was so excited to spend this time with you, and I hope it was helpful. And the book is ready for pre order now, but it